All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. As usual, I'm your host, Eric Cunningham. With us this week, we have Dylan Brown and Kraz Grinitz. I don't believe Joe is going to be joining us this week, but we do have a good show for you so far. It's not been the busiest news week in terms of political stories, but there has been some interesting stuff that's gone on this cycle. Some interesting stories. We had some historic election results on Tuesday. We have some elections that are upcoming that we're going to be covering this Tuesday. Basically, and we got some other stuff for you as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into things. I think we'll go ahead and start off here with probably the big news of the week, which was Herschel Walker had some surprise revelations revealed about himself
Are
in
they
the
that
last week.
surprising though? I mean,
I think we didn't expect what was it, three illegitimate children.
Yeah,
three illegitimate. Well, let's be polite here. Three children he doesn't pay attention to, born to women who are not his wife.
Yes, not good, not a great look. This is already shaping up. Georgia is shaping up to be one of the ugliest Senate races in the country. Both candidates have extreme flaws on their end that are exploitable. In a normal election, Raphael Warnock would probably be running ads, probably right now, about domestic stuff with Herschel Walker. The problem is the moment he does that, exposes himself to attack for his own family life. I know this is going to come up at some point during the campaign, but when we actually get to the debates, this is going to get really, really, really ugly. I would not be shocked if this is the single ugliest election of this cycle in terms of attacks, in terms of tactics. Obviously, Walker easily won the Republican primary to become the nominee for Senate. He's actually been leading in the polls generally against Raphael Warnock. It's either been tied or he's been ahead. But behind Kemp is usually leading by about 5 or 6 points in the polls. Walker is usually leading closer to 2 or 3 or being even with Warnock. Few polls, if any polls right now, show Warnock ahead. But we have the race listed as a toss-up. Clearly, he is running behind Brian Kemp to some degree. We even saw him run behind Brian Kemp in the Republican primary. So I'll go ahead and throw it to you guys. What do you think about this? Obviously, we've had situations just in 2020 where candidates had some scandals pop up, some sex scandals come up. Although in this case, it's not so much a sex scandal as a parenting scandal, and that did seem to impact some of their candidacies. So, what do you guys think? How is this going to play into things? Does this hurt? Obviously, how much does this hurt uh, Walker's campaign in particular?
Well, I'm gonna say that Jonathan Reutenberg has the hard-hitting analysis that I'm going with, which is nothing matters. He will win anyway. I still think Walker's the favorite here. I mean, look, right? Like, I think the reason scandals have become less and less of a big deal in American politics is because as the universe of swing voters has decreased and become smaller, the number of people who can actually be moved by these kinds of scandals is smaller and smaller. And at the end of the day, what kinds of voters care about? I mean, look, being a deadbeat dad is not a good look. I mean, we can agree. But what kinds of voters care, right? To the extent there are, pretty, I would say, ideological, internally consistent, maybe more religious or moralistic voters that care about this kind of stuff. Those voters are largely either Democrats if they are non-white, and particularly in Georgia, a lot of black voters might hold those views. Or in Georgia, if they're not Democrats, they're hardcore Republicans because they're usually going to be evangelical Christians. And so I just don't see how a scandal about being a deadbeat dad, which is never viewed positively, but I don't see how it's going to move enough people to make a difference here.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree, though I don't think Walker is a favorite. I don't think the scandal's going to hurt, and I don't think it should. My position on these scandals is almost always it's their personal life. It won't or shouldn't have much bearing on uh, how good of a representative they'd be, unless there are egregious examples, obviously, that make you question their ethics. But I mean, this I don't see how it moves anybody, and I don't think it really should.
I think it's a fair thing to criticize people for. I actually think, kind of conversely, Republicans historically have been hit harder by these kinds of sex and family scandals, because like if your whole thing is like family values, like pro-life, because children are so important, parents are important, whatever, like all that stuff. Obviously, I think the scandals make you look like more of a hypocrite if you're like a deadbeat if you're like a deadbeat dad.
Of course,
so I think
criticizing the hypocrisy is totally fair.
Right. I think it maybe looks a little bit worse than if he was like kind of a more like hippie Democrat type candidate. But again, I'm with you, Dylan. I don't think it really moves too many votes. And I think voters have figured out the game. It doesn't actually really impact the kind of policies you pursue. So,
I mean, I think in the totality of Walker's vulnerabilities, the things he's said that are blatantly untrue and the charities he's maybe started, I think this scandal ranks pretty low on the list, personally.
Yeah, that's an entirely understandable, defensible argument. I'll take a little bit of a... I also don't think it's going to matter too much, but again, like I said earlier, I think it's because Warnock can't really effectively target on domestic issues so much. He's going through a fairly ugly divorce, or already gone through that, but also you have the child custody stuff coming out right now. Any pressure on Warnock or on Walker is going to lead to Walker pointing out the stuff that's going on, and Warnock's ex-wife is accusing him of being a deadbeat, essentially, in terms of supporting her children. So, can he actually go after this? Is this something he's going to focus time on? I don't know if that would be the best use of time. It's not like with Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham, for example. I think the reason that one did so much was it was such an absurd situation. It was beyond ridiculous. The stuff that came out, it just looked.
It was just silly.
It was silly. It was it
wasn't really even necessarily bad. It was just
I actually didn't even believe it was real when I first saw it.
Yeah, it was embarrassing. It would be like finding out like that a congressman is, it's just incredibly bizarre stuff. And I think the shock of like just how dumb it was impacted this. This is fairly typical. There's going to be both sides. There's going to be all sorts of stuff here.
I think it calls your judgment into question if you're a grown man that flirts like that.
Yeah.
Man, you're just coming at me like that, Chris.
I'm just saying, I don't know. And thanks, Tanner, for saying it looks like I haven't slept in a few days. Yeah, that's basically accurate. I don't sleep.
He is a law student. He is a law student here, so keep that in mind.
Is that gonna be me in 4 months?
Yes, it will be you in 4 months. This is correct.
That sounds brutal.
Yeah. But obviously, we have the Georgia races. We think Georgia, generally, the gubernatorial race leans Republican. We've seen no evidence to indicate that Brian Kemp is not favored. Abrams is not running as strong of a campaign this time. She's kind of it's really been a low-profile race, oddly enough. There's not been a whole lot of national coverage of it. Kemp is just kind of doing his thing. You haven't seen a whole lot of Stacey Abrams since the whole complaining about Georgia being the worst state in the country to live in. That's kind of been the last thing that's kind of showed up for her. But the Senate race has actually been fairly high profile. This is, oddly enough, that's why having two more boring candidates, I would argue. This is going to be a much more interesting campaign. Similarly, so we have this race in Georgia. We have also Nevada. It's worth noting the races have come up there. The Nevada race, Catherine Cortez Masto, the incumbent senator, is already running ads against Adam Laxalt. I believe it's focusing on his support for oil, which is interesting. Oil companies, which is an interesting campaign tactic at this present moment in time, I would argue. But you've already seen that come up. That's one of our other toss-up races we have. That one at toss-up. Pennsylvania, we have a toss-up still. And then Wisconsin, we have it leans Republican. New Hampshire leans Democrat. North Carolina, likely Republican. And I think that's pretty much everything on our table, other than a couple of long shot ones like Washington, for example, is in the long shot likely Democratic column. Worth noting, Democrats are spending there. We'll go ahead though and move on to our next topic here. So one thing I wanted to point out here. So we obviously have the Alabama runoff coming up this week. And if Joe was here, I would ask him to play taps for Mo Brooks, because it seems like the moment has come. The end of Mo Brooks' political career appears imminent after essentially a week of begging former President Trump to re-endorse him. And when I say begging, I mean literally begging, going on Twitter, retweeting.
Yeah, that's not an
every random.
exaggeration. When people post like Notes app apologies that are like, "I'm so sorry for what I said. Like, I'll do better next time." It's just like a Notes app like down bad. It was like Notes app like President.
It was really bad.
It was really
like,
bad.
I mean, it was like it got to the point in this literal Notes message that he was basically saying that it was a good thing that Trump unendorsed him because it was a kick in the pants. And please, Daddy Trump, please re-endorse me. I'm so
Daddy.
sorry. I mean, it's literally ridiculous. It's the most absurd thing I've ever seen. It has that energy. It's
worth noting.
It's pathetic.
It was pretty bad.
It's worth noting Mo Brooks campaigned harder for the Trump re-endorsement than he campaigned in the first round of the primary.
Yeah, and in general. So obviously this begging did not work. Former President Trump looked at this, looked at the barrage of 15-year-old populists on Twitter that Mo Brooks was retweeting, and then looked at Katie Britt, who was ahead about 20 to 25 points in the polls, and said, "I'm going to go with Katie Britt because she's up 20 to 25 points in the polls."
Although to be fair, there was one poll. The last poll that came out only showed her up by like 8 points.
Well, that was a Mo Brooks push. I think that was the Mo Brooks push poll.
Brooks
like,
push poll?
Yeah, that was basically like, oh yeah, she's only up by 8. And if Trump re-endorses Mo Brooks is up. So please re-endorse Mo Brooks. It didn't work.
No.
So Mo Brooks.
That's so sad.
Yeah. So Mo Brooks has essentially resorted to flailing around randomly on Twitter now, attacking Katie Britt, attacking Mitch McConnell, touting the Rand Paul endorsement. Really big deal in Alabama. The Rand Paul endorsement. Gotta factor in that support here.
Also getting mad at Trump, which I think is the funniest thing in the world.
Yeah, there was a whole article that came out where basically he said that everyone Trump has ever endorsed, he turns his back on, and he's not wrong. He also said this before he endorsed Trump to begin with in 2016. And then was surprised when this happened to him. That's a big leopards eating the face moment. He voted for that.
Pikachu face.
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah, he's like,
it can't happen to me.
How could this happen?
He was like,
to me?
I'm misremembering. Like, he didn't run as this back in like 2017. Like in 2017, he ran as like he was like a kind of like a conservative, like alternative to Luther Strange, but he wasn't trying to be like Roy Moore.
Mm-hmm.
But then Roy Moore just like blew him out of the water in like the headline grabbing department.
So did you see that Roy Moore endorsed Mo Brooks?
Wow, big one. That's big.
Yeah, that's a crucial demographic.
That's too bad felons can't vote in Alabama.
That's the only the only Republican to lose a statewide federal race to a Democrat in Alabama this century. That's a huge endorsement there.
I remember after that race, someone was like all-time line. Someone was like, man, like Steve Bannon is a political genius. He got a pro-choice Democrat elected in Alabama. I was like, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I'm not shocked by this. Mo Brooks is known for not being an excellent campaigner. He's from a very poor political area in the state. He's from Huntsville, which is not the largest metro in the state. It's not. I don't even think it's in the top 3. I think the biggest 3 are Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile. Montgomery is located, or not Montgomery. Huntsville is located further north. It's basically his only base district, and he lost his district in the primary. All these are pretty bad showings of strength. We'll be interested to see how much of the vote he gets, because he's essentially running as a 2014 insurgent conservative, and he's performing about as well. We'll expect as one of those candidates, which is not very well at all. Frankly, we're going to see how it goes. Britt obviously is a political newcomer to some degree as an elected politician. She's not a newcomer politically. She's been open pretty much about wanting to be the next Richard Shelby, wanting to stay in the Senate for decades to basically provide. And I know that sounds awful. That's for a lot of people that sounds, she's openly planning to be in the Senate for decades. No, her plan is like Richard Shelby was in the Senate for decades. He did a lot of great work for Alabama because he raised up in seniority and passed a lot of good bills. I want to do the same thing. That's basically her message is send me to Washington. I'll be there for 40 years and I'll get a lot of stuff done for you. That's a pretty old fashioned political message, but oddly enough, it's really worked. It's actually really worked in Alabama. She's really got a lot of support from the business community, got a lot of support from conservatives, obviously. But it's an interesting approach, I think.
And I mean, it helps that A, she's a good campaigner, and B, that
Mhm.
Richard Shelby endorsed her. I
Yep,
mean,
Richard Shelby endorsed her. Yep.
I mean,
And that Trump
yeah,
didn't endorse in round one. I think that also helped to a good degree. She drastically overperformed expectations in round one, came pretty close to actually, relatively close to winning an outright majority, a lot closer than people had thought. I think she finished with around 43% of the vote. Polls were predicting closer to 34, 35 with her still in first. So, I'm going to be
I
interested to
think
see one how. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, Jonathan Reutenberg just said, I think Huntsville is the biggest city. So why isn't Mo Brooks doing better? I think the problem is that Huntsville, to my understanding, and someone from Alabama can correct me, it feels like it's kind of disconnected from the rest of the state. Like you have Huntsville, and then Huntsville politicians never do well in primaries outside of that strip up there around Huntsville. And my general feeling has been like, you have Huntsville up there, then you have a big section in the north central part of the state that's very rural, very underpopulated, a lot of thick forest, a lot of kind of small towns. And then you get down to Birmingham, and then it's like Birmingham, Montgomery, like Tuscaloosa, Mobile, like all drivable, all kind of like integrated with each other. And so like it's just kind of different. And so I get the feeling that Huntsville, despite being big and despite having a lot of actually a decent amount of like wealth and education now with like there's NASA there, there's some emerging companies there, like it's kind of just separated from the rest of the state though.
Well, the best way I would put it is think about it this way. Huntsville is the biggest city in the state, but as a metro area, it's actually smaller than places like Birmingham in particular. It is disconnected. It's in the Appalachian region of the state. It's in the mountains. It's politically disconnected. The voters there have also been out of step with frankly with a lot of the state of Alabama. They voted federally for Democrats for Congress for decades, past the point where other areas in Alabama did, particularly that really strong socially conservative Republican belt that's putting up Stalin-esque margins for Republicans at this point. The area between Huntsville and Birmingham, that area is just unbelievably Republican at this point. And it's sandwiched between Birmingham, which is where a lot of business connections are, has big Republican suburbs, like the old style Republican suburbs that vote incredibly strongly for Republicans. So it's outside of that area. Its main industries are not in the same focus as the rest of the state. You obviously mentioned NASA. It's got a high proportion of college-educated people. It's got a lot of that sort of base, but that's not the rest of Alabama. If you're Richard Shelby, he focused a lot on when he was focusing on Huntsville, he focused on NASA. He focused on the space, all the space stuff there. Keeping the space, what's it called, the space launch system in place, which is horrible. They should have gotten rid of that. Richard Shelby did a very good job of making sure that the space launch system will be part of the Artemis program. That's not something, if you're from Mobile or from Montgomery or from Birmingham, you probably care too much about. That's disconnected from a lot of the rest of the state. So I think that's a good assessment. I think Mobile also has a similar problem. It's also disconnected. It's on the coast, but I think it would be arguably much easier for someone from Mobile to run than it would be from Huntsville. I don't know. That's just the impression I get. Is it seems like it's just not a great place to run from. If you're wanting to run, you're wanting to run from those bases, the Republican bases around Birmingham or Montgomery. You get that business support, business community, Republican clubs. You get all that stuff going on. You campaign locally. You build it out. And you basically do what Katie Britt did. Another thing I'd mention is that she's basically towed the line very well between being very clearly the establishment candidate. I mean, she is very, very clearly the establishment Republican candidate here. She's towed the line between that and also being very, very conservative. She's talked about, for example, supporting the RAISE Act, which is similar to the bill Tom Cotton has proposed that would restrict immigration more. She's not talked about Trump's electoral fraud claims. When she has, she said, I've already given statements about it. And when people ask her spokespeople for statements, they say, well, yeah, she's already given a statement about that. Basically, you can't find her statement on the election. It's just generally, it's really, really clever what she's done there. I've been very impressed with her campaign personally. I think
I've been very impressed.
Is it clever or just like, no, I'm not giving you one? Is that really
it's basically
clever?
not giving you one.
No, but it's clever because this is what I think voters kind of want, is like they want someone who's not like, I have a hard time describing it, but it's like I think voters don't want someone who's like Biden won, Trump's wrong, like whatever. And I think like it's not that a majority of the party hates that. It's that 30% of the party really hates that. And you'd have to be electorally suicidal to voluntarily give up that 30% of the party. So like, she doesn't say that. And a lot of politicians have said that. And it's like, give up 30% right there. And sometimes you're like Brad Raffensperger and you can survive. But most of the time, like, you're not. And some candidates have survived, but it's harder. And so, but also like, I think that there is some kind of limiting factor in being like, yep, fraudulent, like overturn it, like decertify, like whatever. There's a limiting factor in that because like then you run in that like lane kind of. And so I think she's basically done what I think the party will kind of mimic, which is like, oh, like, you know, let's just move on. Like, let's just not talk about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, that's pretty much what Democrats did after 2000 and 2004, right? You had a handful of people who were convinced that these elections were stolen. The 2004, you had enough people that were able to force a debate on the floor about it. And when they had that debate, Nancy Pelosi went up there and said, basically like, oh, we're not trying to overturn the election. We're not doing all this. We just have a few concerns. We want to work with you guys on those concerns. And
that's what they've done. I mean, a lot of these candidates, if you look at websites too, they're not saying like, oh, it was fraudulent or like, oh, it should be decertified. They're just saying like, I want to like restore confidence in like elections. And like,
that's
I think that's the way, like, because then the people who really believe it was fraudulent can look at it and be like, oh, like they're just not saying it outright. So like the liberal media doesn't attack them, but like, you know, and so they can kind of triangulate that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. That's, I mean, literally go back and watch Nancy Pelosi's 2004 speech. It's literally what she basically said. She's like, yeah, we have like, there's these ballot stuff. There's maybe voter suppression. There's some stuff with voting machines. We don't like this stuff. Let's work with you guys and get, except the difference is obviously Republicans aren't talking about working with anyone on this sort of stuff. They're more like, yeah, we need to do all this stuff that's not going to happen federally.
Well, you might get the Electoral Count Act.
Yeah, you can get the Electoral Count Act, but that's not something Republicans. That's basically the end. I mean, my hope, obviously, this is not going to happen. My hope with the Electoral Count Act has always been they make the process automated because that gets rid of the idiotic, moronic grandstanding that pops up every 4 years, except for 2008 and 2012. Thank God it didn't happen then. Every 4 years. You have these idiots going up like, oh, I have this objection because they think the best way to get votes for president or Senate is to just object to electoral votes. This doesn't work. Pretty clearly it doesn't work. If it worked, Josh Hawley would not be polling at literally 0% in presidential polls.
Gotta be, I gotta say, guy who has really like kind of probably like gone off like Josh Hawley. Okay, he was a John Roberts clerk. High-powered lawyer, like literally clerk on the Supreme Court. Like there's 30 people like that every year. Like it's like that's like no one, right? Like he's incredibly smart, obviously, right? Incredibly talented. Runs for Attorney General in Missouri. Runs for Senate, beats an incumbent. Has like genuinely kind of like interesting ideas about ways to take the party, and then just like completely just like I don't even know what happened to this guy, like just like absolutely went like completely like January 6th, like just like always for the cameras. He's like 2013 Rand Paul, just like always for the cameras, you know.
But that's the funny thing. 2013 Rand Paul grandstanded on issues that people kind of agreed with him on. Josh Hawley's grandstanding on things that 30% of his party likes.
But that's the funny thing. That's the funny thing is when I go back and look at this January 6th stuff, right? What people will always say about it is that people voted to overturn the election. I don't disagree with that wording. I think we apply that consistently. You say people like Benny Thompson, Jamie Raskin also voted to overturn. I think that's fair wording based on the actual outcome. What they would argue, and what the exact same thing Democrats argued in 2004, except Republicans went a little bit further. The Ted Cruz idea was that you delay counting for a week. You have some sort of commission. The commission does nothing, and then you just count it next week. That wasn't going to happen. But that's also not let's overturn the election and throw it to someone else. They expected this to basically be, we grandstand on this issue. There's some protesters outside. They'll protest. It'll be like Trump in 2016. You have the angry, squealing, yelling feminist outside. You have this big, surge of anger that builds up your base a little bit. You get personally built up. Nobody gets hurt. Biden gets, nominated. Biden gets, chosen anyway because you literally cannot stop this. But you get some political points. I don't think they expected a literal invasion of the Capitol. So the best way to avoid that happening even accidentally again is to get rid of the ability to object to electoral votes. I don't think 20% is a high enough threshold. I think at minimum, not even for debate, I think when the votes are actually being counted, there should not even be a process for you to object at all. You should have to hand everything in beforehand. Like before you go in, you have to have a senator, you have a House member, or whatever, how many, 20 senators and however many House members. You have to have all of them signed in by writing, hand it to the clerk before they even start counting the votes. Otherwise, it just continues normally, and you get booted out of the chamber if you try to pull some nonsense.
What percentage would you have? I think somewhere between like 40 and 60%. Like you need to have almost half the chamber be like, we all agree that this is like wrong.
You need it. 40% would basically ensure almost the entire majority of the opposing caucus. That seemed like a reasonable threshold. At the other hand, I think it'd be fairly easy if Republicans win Georgia in 2024. I think almost every single Democrat in the House would vote to overturn Georgia's election results.
See, I don't think so. I would have said so in 2020. But not after.
You don't think so now?
No, because I think. Well, okay. I'm not going to rule out the possibility. Actually, you know what? Don't that scratch that I said I was certain. I was certain about that. I wouldn't rule out the possibility because I think elections get really high octane and like really nasty, and so I think like there is a possibility that people are like, oh, like Brian Kemp was running it like fraudulently, whatever, like the machines. But I do think though that like given what happened on January 6th and just given like how poorly those objections turned out when like clearly a lot of Republicans were treating those objections kind of like one big joke or like one big political show, and then like actually turned out like very, very bad. I think like for a lot of Democrats, especially, like that's not like a third rail. Like we're just not like that's just not going to happen. Like, just not gonna
you think like Jim Langford was on board with this. If there's many ways you can describe Jim Langford, a grandstanding lunatic is not generally seen as one of them. Like. It's a really weird, for that matter, Benny Thompson is not generally seen as a grandstanding lunatic. Jamie Raskin maybe, but Benny Thompson is generally seen as like pretty liberal, but like someone who's generally like not publicly spouting nonsense all the time. Like, I don't know. I am still of the opinion that the fact this even exists in the process is an extreme problem. I'm hopeful that you're correct and that this has created such a stigma that we're not going to be getting objections anytime in the near future.
See,
I think it's poisoned the well, and that's awesome.
Yeah, see, I don't think that just removing the day and making the counting automatic actually solves the problem. I think the big thing that needs to be done is whatever the voters in the states say is what goes. None of this state legislatures getting to choose the delegates. I'm sorry, that's the word. State legislatures shouldn't get to choose their own delegates. If the voters in the state say something, that's what the voters in the state say. Sorry.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated. I wrote a little bit on this. I think it's a little bit more complicated. Like, I think state legislatures could vote to like send in a competing slate. But like my understanding is like you get into thorny issues of state law when you're like, we already held the election, but like we're just going to pass a law saying like actually retroactively, like we decide that this person gets like like you couldn't pass a law or like okay, like this is complicated and gets back to like Bush v. Gore, but like basically like you can't like most people agree that it's dubious. I would say dubious to be like we said it was going to be a popular vote, and now we're going to go back retroactively and say, actually, the law is that we get to choose, and we're choosing this person. Like that is like a little bit more legally dubious. And some people, there were like some weird Trump people who were like, well, like according to the independent state legislature's doctrine, but like that's not what that is. They like totally mixed up very cool doctrines. They're just all over the place.
Right. Yeah. But I think it would be very easy to just pass a law federally that says we'll only recognize a state delegation
that's fair.
That matches the votes in the state.
Yeah. And to be fair, what we're talking about here is we're talking about fringe scenarios, right? I think the reason I say automatic, you go automatic is it gets rid of the time and the place, which are the two factors needed to create another January 6th. It gets rid of the time, a certified moment where this happens. The votes are being counted and that can be disrupted. It gets rid of the place where everyone is assembled, where not only are people potentially grandstanding, but also people are potentially targets. You get rid of those two variables. That's the benefit of automatic. And those are two pretty big variables.
You solve the problem of January 6th. You don't necessarily solve the problem of overturning an election, but you do solve the problem or you begin to solve the problem of a literal riot.
And what kind of makes me angry, honestly, about this whole voting rights discussion that's gone on since then is there could have been an actual honest discussion to fix this after the election. You would have probably had 90 to 95 votes in the Senate to change some of this stuff. Because I think it's pretty much in everyone's vested interest at this point that election results are not altered. Now, the House is a tougher sell, but in the Senate, I can maybe count 5 Republicans on my hand who would be opposed to the Electoral Count Act reform, and I could maybe count 10 who would say, oh, yeah, maybe states should be able to choose their own electors. Pretty much everyone else would. It would be pretty challenging to find, a bunch of Republicans willing to stick up for the idea that the state can send an alternative slate of electors against the vote of the people.
Right. I think if you did it in the immediate aftermath, I think there would have been a lot of support. I think now the problem is that there's kind of feeling like there's almost a position implicit. I don't think people say it explicitly, but I think there's kind of a position among some politicians that's like, well, actually, maybe they should be able to decide. So, like, whatever.
But here's the thing: it's a lot like impeachment, where I think if the impeachment of Trump the second time had come to the Senate on January 8th, he would have been convicted. I think that's true, and I don't know that you can really argue it isn't. I don't know that there was a way to get that bill drafted in time for Republicans to take the step back and go, this isn't as electorally tenable for us anymore as it was in the immediate aftermath.
Well, again, in the immediate aftermath, the approach was on the voting rights bill, which had nothing to do with anything that happened on January 6th, which was a complete and total tactical blunder, in my opinion. Go right ahead.
Well, I was going to say that if people are curious, because Jonathan Roitenberg going over some legal stuff, I was saying if people are curious about some of the election fraud stuff in terms of like what can states actually do after the votes are counted, or what can like state actors do. There was a really interesting thread from Professor Derek Muller, who's an election law professor at Iowa, about what's going on in New Mexico right now. So one of the county GOPs is just like refusing to certify their primary results for like seemingly no reason. Like they haven't actually offered any good reason except they haven't even alleged like any kind of like fraud or irregularity. They've just been like, we don't want to certify the results, which like maybe it's like a test run to see if they could do it like in
they apparently don't like Dominion voting machines. That's apparently
I don't know what the deal is. But so what happened was the New Mexico primary was only, it wasn't on Tuesday, right? It was a week and a half ago. It was like 10 days ago. And already they've gone up to the New Mexico Supreme Court. New Mexico Supreme Court was like, we're going to issue a writ of mandamus to tell you have to certify these results. Like you presented no evidence there's fraud. Like you have to certify these. And if you don't, we're either going to throw you in prison or we're going to order someone else to do it. And like in most states, certifying results like that is not like a discretionary duty. It's not like, oh, like, I don't think so. It's like, you have to do it, or like someone's going to sue you and you're going to be under a court order to do it, or you're going to prison.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think okay, take Pennsylvania as the example, since Doug Mastriano literally wants to do this in 24.
I actually read their election code. As it so happens.
I don't know that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court would be down for Mastriano's plan. I think that is a dubious proposition, but I don't think Mastriano should be given the ability to try.
And it makes you wonder, why, I think the best approach would have been to ensure he doesn't win the primary, but there is a bunch of people on the right and the left who are convinced that he would be the best nominee for Republicans for different reasons. For Republicans, it's because some of them are delusional nutcases, and for Democrats, it's because they're assuming voters would not elect a delusional nutcase. This is, of course, against reality.
Did we not play this game already in 2016? Guys,
it's playing Russian roulette with democracy, essentially, which is a terrific idea. It's not good.
We've done this, and I mean, as that Pennsylvania poll that came out showed, maybe playing with fire is a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be in a position where that happens, but like at some point you got to look at it and say, maybe Congress has got to do something. The problem, of course, is that Congress, it's taken a year to get Electoral Count Act. Honestly, this came out of nowhere. I was surprised they were still talking about this. The proposal is to increase the threshold, among other things, to 20% to consider an objection. This would have prevented there's basically no scenario where 20 senators from the other party are going to support objecting votes. I don't think there were 20 Republicans on board. Last time, there were certainly not 20 Democrats on board. In 2004, there was literally one Democrat on board.
The Senate is the more serious chamber. Let's be clear about this.
They're the House of Lords.
In the House.
Now, the House. Honestly, this is why I say I'm surprised that nothing happened in 2008, and particularly in 2012, because I do know for a fact there were some very crazy people in the House in 2012, and remarkably, none of them objected to the presidential election. That's honestly pretty impressive.
Though what I will say is, it will be peak Democrat if they pass the Electoral Count Act and then Mastriano sends a different batch of delegates and they can't object to the results flipping Pennsylvania against the will of the voters. That would be a very Democrat move.
Yeah, that would be a problem. But we'll go ahead. I think we've talked about this. I do want to go over one other thing before the show, though, which is the Texas 34 special election result. When we went off on Tuesday, the result had been called for Mayra Flores. The result stayed pretty much exactly the same. She won her election by about 8 percentage points. Republicans outvoted Democrats by about 5. Just in response to Jonathan Martinberg here in the comments, I was talking more Steve King from Iowa, among others.
Alan West. Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh has had character development.
But more together. So Flores, obviously, it's been a big media splash. We had this race that leans Republican. We probably could have moved it to likely, honestly. Republicans were favored here, and they won. Let's clear up a couple of things, though. One, that I've seen some of the media mention, which is not accurate. One, she is not the first Republican to represent this district or area in 150 years because the district hasn't existed up until 2010, and Republicans actually won the district in 2010. Rather, they won the previous iteration of this Cameron to Corpus Christi sort of area seat in 2010. So Republicans had done that before. She's also not the first Mexican-born congressperson. She's the first Mexican-born congresswoman to be elected.
Someone unnamed told me that the confusion came because they think that white people who don't speak Spanish put Mexicana from Spanish media into Google Translate, which just comes out as Mexican in Google Translate.
No. That's bad.
That's pretty bad. That is pretty bad. But moreover, to get at why this happened, I want to lead into a little bit of discussion here. One, what do you guys think about this result? I mean, obviously, we expected this to some degree. But moreover, is this message that she had replicable? She focused on a very interesting approach for Republicans. It was very intensely focused on local issues. She emphasized her family, her status as the daughter of immigrants, in particular, quite a bit during her campaign, her husband being a Border Patrol agent. Obviously, Republicans we have favored in the 15th district. And then the 28th district, I believe, that's been called for Cuellar at this point, right? So there's the looming sort of threat of an indictment there. Republicans are hoping to win all 3 seats. I think it's very possible they win 2. I find it very unlikely they win all 3. But this has got to be concerning to Democrats. From what I've heard, it is concerning. So what do you guys think about this? Is this approach replicable? What do you think of her campaign and kind of the chances going into November in a much more Democratic seat, one that voted for Biden by, I believe, 14 points as opposed to 4, with more of Hidalgo County in particular in the seat?
I don't know if the strategy is replicable. I'm also not entirely sure how worried this should make Democrats beyond how worried they should already be.
From what I've heard, they're at a 15 on a scale of 1 to 10. Rio Grande Valley Democrats are about a 15 in level of concern right now. That's what I've heard.
But they should already have been there. They should have already been there. So I don't know if this should not take that up a notch because, as you already said, this was a seat that was favored to flip. This is a bad national environment for Democrats, and I don't know that it's going to get any better. So beyond the level of concerned that Democrats should already be, this shouldn't really raise it. I wasn't surprised that she won outright. I think that was obvious when we were on Tuesday. I was not surprised. Honestly, if I was surprised by anything, I was surprised that Democrats got as close as they did. Though I think that margin shifted away from them after I had left.
It ultimately, yeah, they're down 52.5 to 47.5, and then Flores herself won by 8 points. The other Dan Sanchez only got about 43% of the vote.
Okay, so 8 points is a bit more than I would have liked to see if I were Democrats, but a 5-point loss would have been in line with the environment that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Dylan's point, I don't think it raises concern so much as it solidifies the idea that we're in probably like an R+4, R+5 environment at least.
Mm-hmm.
This particular result is somewhat concerning because you would expect there to be some down ballot lag from the national environment. So the fact that there wasn't, I think, points to the idea that what?
Sorry, I just wanted to say I think this would be one of the few seats where I wouldn't expect that because it was already going to the right. So the down ballot.
Well, we saw a similar one. Yeah. We saw a similar one though in California in the Devin Nunes seat. Republicans won that seat by over, I think it was 62 to 38. This is a Trump +5 seat, which is a pretty more substantial hold.
Yeah, so I just think generally, like, I just think like it points to there being like a fairly large Republican shift.
Mm-hmm.
In areas like not there being not that much split ticket voting, right? That's concerning for Democrats. You want there when you're the in power party, you want there to be split ticket voting in favor of you. Jonathan and Matthew in the comments make a good point, which is like, it was less of a swing than Virginia and New Jersey. Turnout was low, and all those things are important caveats, obviously.
And it was a special election. Democrats didn't spend much. There are a lot of caveats you can give. Sure. I don't think those caveats necessarily remove the reasonability of this discussion, though.
Yeah, I think the saying is if ifs or buts were candies and nuts, every day will be Christmas. Like, at some point, you gotta stop looking at these special results. Like, oh well, there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this. Right. Yeah, all that can happen. It's still bad.
I like to compare it to Georgia 6 back in like 2017, which was like, I don't know, right? Like there were all these caveats, right? Democrats spent all this money, they knocked all these doors, but at the end of the day, yes, Karen Handel won, but it was virtually the same margin as Trump, and that was in a super suburban district where she had roots, where she was established, where Republicans had typically done so much better than Trump. And so at the time, I think the GOP celebrated that as like either a big victory or like, oh, whatever, it was close, but there's all these caveats. When you look back at Georgia 6, like that was the canary in the coal mine being like, no, like the suburban shift is very, very real. And these suburban voters very much associate the Republican Party with Donald Trump. He's not a one-off. And like, I think this is potentially similar. Obviously, we're not going to know until after the results come in if this was a canary in a coal mine. I do think one thing you raised that now this is going to be a Biden plus like 16 district or something. I think she's probably an underdog. Like that's just so blue. Like,
yeah, that
she wins and she's going to be a well-funded incumbent, but like that's so blue. And I think what she's really running for is to convince the Texas GOP to redraw these seats in for the 2024 cycle to give her a more favorable district to run in that cycle. So I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to mention here is that, when we're talking about the district, we're talking about Georgia 6. That's a seat that was Trump +2. Right. Went to Abrams by 4, and then it went to Biden by 11. That's a pretty rapid shift there, right? In hindsight, going from a congressman who I don't believe had any opposition in 2016 to only holding the seat by 2 to losing it in 2018 and 2020, that's not the approach you would want here if you're a Democrat. Now, D plus 14 is Biden plus 14 is pretty big. That is genuinely pretty big. But on the other hand, Republicans hold other Hispanic Biden plus 14 seats. They hold several in California. or they hold one in California, I should say. They're competitive in 3 more right now. I believe we have listed. We have 3 double-digit Biden seats in the Central Valley that we have at leans Democratic right now. Either have toss-up or I think we have the Valdow seat at leans Republican, the other 2 at leans Democratic. Leans are likely, or toss-up. Those are in the realm of competitiveness. I do think it would be a challenge for her, but I do think she has some unique strengths. She's been all over Univision. She's been all over a lot of Spanish language media, have been presenting this really positively. It's not every day that a Mexican-born person is elected to Congress. Certainly not every day it happens on the border. She has a lot of benefits that would be going for her. I know there's some local elements here too. There's a lot of Hidalgo County in the seat, and there's a rivalry sort of between Hidalgo County and Cameron County, local Democrat, basically the machines in those 2 areas. There's a pretty substantial rivalry between the 2. I wouldn't write her out in November, certainly, but I do think it's a tough hold. This is a substantially redrawn seat. I'm frankly surprised they made it as Democratic as it was, when they could have easily drawn something more Republican. I don't think they actually had a lot of faith in Flores back then. If they had known that she would have won this, then they would have drawn this more like Biden +8, perhaps. But again, Texas is known for mid-decade redistricting. I think it's pretty apparent they're going to be redrawing the lines in some of these areas. Yeah. The question is just when. And, after 2022 probably seems like a good time.
So,
go ahead, Dylan.
No, I just wanted to say that Philip Myers says that she had a pretty hard right issues page, and that should be a concern because she wasn't a moderate. She ran a very moderate campaign in tone, from what I could see.
She ran it extremely moderate. And when this is like going to a website for a Democrat for like Katie Porter's website and saying, oh, well, Katie Porter can't win this Orange County seat. Look at her website. It's so progressive. She supports this, this, and this, and this, and this. And did she win? Yes, she won. Sometimes that matters, but she's a good messenger sometimes, I think.
How you portray yourself,
very, very good messenger.
How you portray yourself is always more important than what beliefs you actually hold. Like if you look at for example, Kay Ivey's ads, Kay Ivey is considered to be a fairly conservative governor, but her ads were all about we got through COVID, we have vaccines now, I've grown Alabama for business, whatever. And so she, even though she's a pretty conservative governor, she messaged as I'm a get it done kind of business friendly moderate. And how you message is always more important than your actual beliefs.
I'd recommend actually. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd actually recommend going and watching some of her ads. Some of the ones I watched in particular. One ad talking about how her family has been personally impacted by illegal immigration. That's a local issue. That's a strong concern that her husband works in Border Patrol and that she prays for him daily because his job is dangerous. Another one with just her dad talking about, we moved to America for greater opportunity. It's, pretty typical uplifting stuff. When she was on Hannity talking about it, she's asked about immigration and she made pretty clear she opposes illegal immigration. What was the reason she gave is that it's a really horrible journey for migrants to come across the border like this illegally. And she can't for the life of her imagine why Democrats would encourage that. That's a very, very different way to frame illegal immigration than say, Ted Cruz or Steve King. That's a very, very different approach, focusing on the human trafficking element, the child trafficking, the drugs, all that sort of stuff. That's very, very different than we just don't want immigrants here. And when she's saying, I want people to come over, I want them to come over like I did and have an opportunity to grow up safe like I did. That's a very, very different way to message things. From what I can tell, her campaign focused primarily on economic issues like inflation, jobs, her family upbringing, and the fact that she's the daughter of immigrants. That's the things that I saw looking at hers. Now, granted, I can't look at the Spanish language content because I don't speak or read Spanish. I'm just looking at what I saw in the English content and what I've been reading, other people have been saying. But that is just my assessment. She did not run some hard right or radically conservative campaign, from what I can tell.
I will say the one thing that might hurt her is really high turnout here in November. I think there's some hope among Republicans that if you get really high turnout, it will bring out a lot of infrequent Republican voters who help make this district less blue than it normally would have been in 2020. I think that's fair. The only thing is like the higher turnout you have, the closer the electorate is going to mirror that Biden plus 14 electorate in 2020. And the closer it mirrors that Biden plus 14 electorate, like the more crossover votes she needs until like it just becomes probably too much. And so I think if it's like a Biden plus 10 electorate that shows up, like that for me is still kind of a lean D race because like that's tough.
That's
right?
tough to overcome no matter how.
Yeah, but what if it's a Biden plus 7 electorate? I think
So
that's
it
a
might
lot
be,
easier.
it might be, but you have to remember though, part of the problem here is like if the environment is 9 points more Republican than
It's still a Biden plus
2020.
5 electorate.
Well, no. So I was gonna say if the environment, like if we go from D plus 4.5 to let's say R plus 5, right? It's not like the electorate actually gets 9.5 points more friendly to Trump. The electorate might only get like 5 points more friendly to Trump or 4 points more friendly to Trump. And then you have crossover voters. So like, I think there's something there about like, she's always going to need more crossover voters than other Republicans potentially. And so that's tough.
Right.
Yep.
And I mean, especially at a time where crossover votes are becoming more and more rare, partisanship is kicking in. You're going to have a tough time being... Not everybody's John Katko. Most people are not John Katko.
Well, what she doesn't need, frankly, are crossover voters. What she needs are permanent vote switchers, like you get in Georgia 6.
Yes.
She needs people that are going to vote, that are going to take a Biden plus 14 district and turn it into maybe a Beto plus 6 district. That's what she frankly needs, and then to overperform there by about 6 points, roughly. That's about what she needs.
That's
for her, ideally.
Ask.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, and again, I'm saying not Beto plus 6 because it's probably not Beto plus 6. From what I've been seeing, the modeling and stuff, very possible Republicans win these districts because Beto is not running a very good campaign, and he's particularly not running well among Hispanics in the Rio Grande Valley. This should be a surprise to literally no one, given what happened in 2018. It's very possible that some of these districts could vote for Abbott and still vote for, Democrats down ballot. That's a bit of a lag there.
Beto of 2018 probably could have done decently. Beto of 2020, nah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and a lot of this is speculation, right? But I think what she needs more people like herself who are actual long-term Legit voters, who are legacy Democrats, who are from legacy Democratic families, or who are the families of migrants and immigrants who have voted for Democrats for a long time and have permanently switched parties at the federal level. That's what she needs. That's a tougher sell in a Biden plus 14 district than it would be in a Biden plus 6 district. I mean, even you look at some of those ones, a lot of the seats that Democrats flipped that were, narrowly in 2018, that were like the Trump plus 10 ones, they flipped back. The ones they held were the Trump plus 2 or Trump plus 4 suburban seats that turned into Biden single digit or double digit seats. It would be hard for me to picture a scenario where the new district goes from a Biden plus 14 district to a Trump or DeSantis seat, right? It'd be pretty hard for me to see that. But if the same swing happens, I don't know. This is basically all speculation here. I do think Mayra Flores, though, is a very strong candidate, and it's going to be very interesting to see what approach she takes in the next 6 months, because right now, she is the main Rio Grande Valley Republican right now, the only one in Congress right now. Monica De La Cruz, we expect her to win. She'll be the second or the first, or the only one left, assuming Flores loses. She can kind of set the tone for what these members of Congress are going to be like.
Yeah. So I think that was all our topics for today. You guys want to do we'll do one brief roundup, quick pet peeves from the election world. Keep it quick, and then we'll wrap up and get out of here.
Yep.
California still can't count their votes.
Fair.
That's all I got.
Eric?
Yeah. My pet peeve would be people on Twitter who are taking a very strong 180 on Hispanic voters and on the it's not a big deal if we lose the Rio Grande Valley. It's only 3 congressional districts. There are 7 congressional districts in Dallas and Houston. That's not how this works. You should not be thinking like that. Don't. That's not a good idea.
Losing voters is okay.
My pet peeve, also people on Twitter this time saying things like the trends in favor of my party will continue forever and the trends against my party will reverse. One of my biggest pet peeves. Almost wrote an article about it back in 2020. Maybe I'll do it now. But yeah, I saw that and it sent me off the wall. So yeah.
Yeah. No, you don't understand, Kraz. The trends that are favoring my party are continuing forever. The trends that are against my party are going away. This means my party will be in charge forever.
Forever.
I don't think you understand this. Forever, literally forever. It's not like there's 100-year historical trend against people holding power in midterms.
The Democrats will be in control forever once the demographics shift.
Oh, no. All right. Well, on that note, thanks everyone for tuning in. You want to sign us off here?
Yep. You can follow us on Twitter at elections_daily and elections-daily.com. We got great articles on the website, good stuff there. You see all our handles here on Twitter at DCunningham2, at Dylan W. Brown 1, at Krez Grenitz. Follow us all. We post some great stuff. Or at least I think we do. I don't check in with all of your accounts necessarily 24/7, so I don't know if you're posting all great stuff.
I only post.
What the hell?
I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking mainly about Dylan.
Tweets, but I only post bangers.
Yeah. No, honestly, I honestly most of the time I spend on Twitter is in the group chat. But yeah, they post great stuff. Kraz has some fantastic maps. It's really good. Just follow all of us. You can also like us, subscribe to us, whatever you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, any platform, podcast platform. We're there. So be sure to do that. Until next time, we'll be here, same time, same place. Hopefully, Joe will be back next week, and we'll have the full panel again. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on next week's edition of Elections Weekly.